afternoon. Welcome to another lockdown lecture on behalf of myself and Lawrence. You're very welcome to this evening, which is all about mini-Purims of the Sephardi world. I know many of you have heard this before, but for those who don't know, Harif is the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. We are a group of volunteers, and we've been trying to keep you entertained and stimulated during this health crisis. The session is being recorded and actually being live streamed to the Harif Facebook page, but you'll be able to see a YouTube recording of it. It'll be uploaded to the Harif website in due course. And if you're on the mailing list, you will be getting a link. You're welcome to write any questions or observations in the chat. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer them, especially if they concern religious practice, but you can have a go. So if you'll just excuse me for 1 minute, I'll be right back. On Thursday evening this week, we'll be celebrating the festival of Purim. So the original Purim, from the word pur, which means lots, is a Jewish holiday which commemorates the saving of the Jewish people from the royal vizier Haman, who was planning to kill all the Jews, as recounted in the book of Esther, a Jewess who married Ahasuerus, king of Persia. Haman's plans are foiled by Esther and her uncle Mordechai. Ahasuerus has a sleepless night, during which he discovers that Mordechai's good deeds have gone unrewarded. He orders the Jews to be protected and Haman executed. The day of deliverance becomes a day of feasting and rejoicing. A mini-Purim or Second Purim, also called Purim Katan, is a celebratory day uniquely observed by a Jewish community or individual family to commemorate the anniversary of its deliverance from destruction, catastrophe, or an anti-Semitic ruler or threat. Similar to the observance of the Jewish holiday of Purim, Second Purims were typically commemorated with the reading of a Megillah or scroll, describing the events that led to the salvation, specially composed prayers, a festive meal, and the giving of charity. In some cases, a fast day was held the day before. Second Purims were established through the ages by hundreds of communities in the Jewish diaspora, including the Karaites and the followers of Shabbatai Tzvi. I have selected, or rather Queen Esther has, just a few to tell you this evening. Let's start in Persia, where the Purim story began. The Purim of Shiraz is on the 2nd of Eshvan. The Jews of Shiraz on that date celebrate a festival called Moed Katan, or Little Feast. On that day, they do not work, they exchange visits, and they salute one another with the words Moed Katan and Abu al-Hassan. The tradition is substantiated by an ancient Judeo-Persian manuscript of uncertain date, possibly written about 1400 or even as early as 1200. a Jew named Abu al-Hassan, who was both shohet and butcher, was accused of having sold taref meat, non-kosher meat, on the eve of the feast of Rosh Hashanah. The anger of the Jews was aroused against the culprit, who immediately embraced Islam and accused his former co-religionists of many crimes. The Mohammedans gave the Jews a choice between death and conversion to Islam, and all chose conversion. 1 month later, Abu al-Hassan died mysteriously on the 2nd of Heshvan. A statement was found in his pocket declaring that the Jews were innocent of the charges brought against them. They were then permitted to return to Judaism, and in memory of the event, the Purim of Moed Katan was instituted. The Sana'a Purim. Once upon a time, there reigned in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, a mighty ruler, the great Imam. He had a young son whom he loved dearly. The young prince was as wise as he was handsome. The Jews of Sana'a also loved the prince, and whenever he visited them in their Jewish quarter, they would all turn out to greet him with love and honor. Now, the king of Yemen, the Imam, had a Jewish advisor. There was no decree or law, no tax or toll, which the king imposed upon his subjects without first consulting his Jewish advisor about it. If it was good for the people as well as for the king, it became the law of the land. But if it was good only for the king or only for some of the people, he would advise the king to reject it. Many of the king's ministers were jealous of the Jewish advisor and resented the trust which the king put in him. They became even more jealous when the king appointed his Jewish advisor as the grand vizier of his kingdom, placing all the affairs of state in his hands. It came to pass that the crown prince, accompanied by his 2 servants, went for a ride through the streets of Sana'a. When the sun began to set, the servants said to their master, "Your Royal Highness, tonight the Jews are celebrating their sugar festival." They called Purim thus because the Jews feasted on sweet pastries. "Let us ride into the Jewish quarter and visit their synagogue, where they are all assembled for the celebration." The suggestion was well received by the crown prince, and he made his way to the Jewish quarter. When he arrived with his 2 bodyguards at the gate of the synagogue, the Chacham Bashi, chief rabbi, and the heads of the community were waiting to welcome the royal visitor with all due honor. The grand vizier, who had come to attend the Purim service in the synagogue, was also there to greet the prince. The servants hurried to the prince to help him dismount. As they had planned, one of them quickly unsheathed the prince's sword, pointing it upwards, while the other held the prince's foot in the stirrup, causing the prince to stumble and fall on the sword's edge. It pierced his heart, and the prince fell dead at their feet. The treacherous servants had done their work so expertly that no one realized what had happened, nor could anyone have seen in the gathering dusk what had happened to the prince. Immediately, the 2 villains raised a hue and cry that the Jews had murdered the crown prince. They left the dead body of the prince in front of the synagogue and galloped back to the palace. The Jews were stunned by the terrible calamity which had befallen them. The joyous spirit of Purim gave way to profound grief, sorrow, and fear. In the meantime, The prince's body was taken to the palace. The king bitterly lamented the deaths of his beloved son and heir. He believed the account which the prince's servants had told him, namely that the crown prince died at the hands of a Jewish assassin. The king ordered that the Jewish quarter be surrounded and guarded, and that no one should be permitted to leave. He gave the Jews 3 days in which to deliver to him the murderer. If they failed to do so, the whole Jewish quarter would be set on fire, and all the Jews in it, men, women, and children, would perish in the flames. The Jewish vizier tried to tell the king the truth, but the king turned a deaf ear to his pleas. He stripped the grand vizier of his honors and ordered him to return to the Jewish quarter to share the fate of his Jewish brothers. The king's ministers pretended to be grief-stricken, but inwardly they were happy that their plot had worked. As usual, in times of distress, the Chacham Bashi ordered a public fast and called upon all the Jews of Sana'a to pray and fast for the next 3 days, the men, women, and even the children. Late in the afternoon of the 3rd day, a little boy suddenly said to his mother, "Mother, God has accepted our prayers. Take me to the king. I can tell him who killed his son." The boy was washed and dressed in his Sabbath clothes, and he was taken to the palace by the Chacham Bashi and the Grand Vizier. They just had enough time to get there before it was too late, for the king was waiting for an answer before sundown. In the throne room, resting in an open golden coffin, lay the body of the crown prince, surrounded by the king, his ministers, and servants. The boy stepped forward. His face was very pale, but his voice was firm. "Your Majesty, God has sent me to tell you who killed your beloved son." Saying this, the boy approached the coffin and placed a piece of parchment on the prince's forehead. On the parchment were inscribed 3 letters, Aleph, Mem, Taf, the first, middle, and last letters of the alphabet, spelling out the word Emet, truth. "Tell us the truth, who killed you?" the boy said to the dead prince. To everybody's horrified amazement, the dead prince sat up and pointed a dead finger towards his 2 servants who were standing there, shaking and trembling. The 2 villains immediately fell on the ground before the king, pleading for mercy. But since they had no mercy on the prince whom they killed in cold blood, nor on the many Jewish children and their parents whom they wished to kill too, the king had no mercy on them. He ordered them to be hanged. Before they were executed, they told the king the names of the wicked ministers who had plotted the crown prince's assassination. They were also hanged, 10 in all. The Yemenite Jews resolved to observe this special Purim Yemen every year on the day after Shushan Purim as a day of rejoicing and feasting and thanksgiving to the Almighty. And the boy, he grew up to be a saintly tzaddik. When the Chacham Bashi passed on to his eternal rest, the boy was chosen to succeed him as the head of all the Yemenite Jews. We move on to the Cairo Purims. In 1323, a Muslim crowd attacked a Jewish funeral procession in Old Cairo. We know this from a report by the poet and scholar Samuel ben Hoshana. Such attacks did occur from time to time. The Islamic dhimmi laws prohibited public displays of Judaism or Christianity, even at funerals, and a funeral could provoke anger. 23 Jews were arrested and jailed. The Jewish community locked themselves in their homes in fear as they fasted and wept. On the third day, a group of Jews appealed to the Caliph al-Hakim to spare the imprisoned Jews. The Caliph looked into the matter. He found wrongdoing on the part of the Muslims. It was they who had instigated the disturbances. He had the 23 released. The Jews joyfully instituted an annual feast each year to commemorate their deliverance. The poet Hoshana, who himself had been jailed, composed the liturgy to be recited during the feast. He also composed a Megillah, or scroll, to commemorate the event. In it, he wrote, "Remember this and place it before your eyes. Tell it to your children and their children and their children, to another generation." The Cairo Purim of 1524. March the 4th, 1524 is remembered by Jewish tradition as the day on which the Jews of Cairo were spared from the slaughter planned for them by the city's Ottoman vizier, Ahmed Pasha. By the time he had emerged from his bath, his plans had been thwarted. Egypt fell under Ottoman control 7 years before, in 1517. This was the same year that Jerusalem was captured by Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Sultan. To represent him in Cairo, Suleiman appointed Ahmed Pasha as governor. Ahmed had hoped for more. He had helped to conquer the island of Rhodes for the Ottomans from the Knights of St. John. Ahmed expected Suleiman to make him Grand Vizier, his chief of staff, in the imperial capital of Constantinople, but the Sultan appointed a boyhood friend of his to that position. The rebuff was apparently sufficient to drive a resentful Ahmed Pasha to plot a rebellion. He imprisoned or executed military figures he considered loyal to the Sultan, and he began confiscating the wealth of provincial officials and peasants alike for his own use. At a symbolic level, he instructed his name to be used in place of the Sultan's in the Friday sermon at local mosques and on locally minted coins. It's here that the traditional Jewish version of the tale begins to resemble the original tale of Haman, Esther, and Mordechai. The head of the mint was Abraham de Castro, a Jew who prudently requested of Ahmed that he put his request in writing to have his name minted on coins. Castro then took the written order to Constantinople, where he showed it to Sultan Suleiman. When he became aware that he had been denounced, Ahmed Pasha resolved to take vengeance on Castro and the Jewish community in general. Having got wind of de Castro's denunciation, Ahmed seized 12 community leaders, threw them in jail, and pillaged the Jewish quarter. Unless he was paid a hefty ransom, he threatened to kill them. A delegation offered Ahmed what money they were able to collect. Ahmed had them locked up and told them they would be executed together with all the Jews of Cairo on that very day, unless they collected 200 silver talents, an astronomical sum. The Jews declared a day of prayer and fasting. They began to collect the money. When they had amassed what they could, about 1/10 of the demanded ransom, they brought the money to the Pasha's palace. Ahmed was in the bath, in the midst of having his head shaved, when his bathhouse was attacked by a rival officer, Jamin al-Hamzawi. The attack prevented him from having the other half shaved, one chronicler recounted. He fled by way of the bathhouse roof. Janim al-Hamzawi gave chase and eventually, with a force of 1,000 Janissaries, captured the renegade governor. Ahmed was beheaded, and according to one account, his head was pickled. The imprisoned Jews were freed. That momentous rescue occurred on the 28th of Adar, which corresponded to the 4th of March, 1524, and it is that date that became an annual day of celebration for the Jews of the city, the Purim al-Mitzriyin, or Cairo Purim. The Hebron Purim. It was every dhimmi community's nightmare, how to muster enough funds to pay the onerous jizya tax. Now, a new pasha came into power as ruler over Hebron, and he was a Jew hater. He lost no time in introducing new edicts against the Jewish community, draining them of their hard-earned money. He quickly issued a call to the rabbis and leaders of the Hebron Jewish community and told them that he had put a tax on them to the sum of 50,000 piastres, which must be paid within the month. Failing which, the Jewish leaders would have to pay with their lives, and the rest of the Jews would be sold as slaves. And to make sure that the leaders would not run away, a few of them were immediately arrested and put in chains. The pasha then sent the others home, warning them that they had better start at once to raise the demanded 50,000 piastres. Knowing it was impossible for the Jews to raise this vast sum, the rabbis immediately decreed that the Jewish community must fast and pray to the Almighty for salvation. At the same time, they decided to send a pidyon, literally ransom, but in this case, an appeal to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were buried in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. The cave of Machpelah was then in Arab hands. The Muslims had built a house of worship above the cave, and Jews were not allowed to visit the holy graves. The Jews were allowed only to ascend a few steps of the building and pray at the site of their holy ancestors from a distance. And even for this privilege, they had to pay the guard. The only way they could think of was to bribe the guard that he should throw the pidyon into the cave, the entrance of which was sealed, so that even he could not enter it. This they knew, but they also knew that there was a kind of window there through which it would be possible to throw in the pidyon. For a sizable bribe, the guard agreed to do them this favor and swore by the beard of his prophet that he would attend to the matter without delay. The night before the due date for payment, the pasha could not sleep. His mind was full of the thought of all the money he would be getting from the Jews. The moon was full, and the following day he hoped his coffers would be equally full. The money-greedy pasha kept his treasures in an iron safe in his bedroom. Whenever he had a sleepless night, he would open this safe and take out a bag of gold coins and count them with great satisfaction. This night too, being unable to fall asleep, he went to his iron safe and took out a large bag of money and began to count the glittering golden coins. It totaled 50,000 piastres exactly, and he gleefully thought that the next day he would be receiving exactly the same amount from the Jewish community. With a happy smile, he returned the bag to the safe, put the key of the safe under his pillow, and fell blissfully asleep. Suddenly, he was startled to see 3 old men in his room. "Give us the bag with the 50,000 piastres if you value your life," they demanded. In fear and trembling, he got the bag of money and handed it over to them. And as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished as if into thin air. The Pasha awoke in a cold sweat. What a terrible nightmare! He at once put his hand under the pillow and was reassured to find the key just where he had left it. So with a sigh of relief, he went back to sleep. The following morning, the Pasha awoke and completely forgot about his nightmare of the previous night. He did not forget, however, that this was the day when he would be receiving the 50,000 piastres from the Hebron Jews. The previous night had also been a sleepless night for all the Jews of Hebron. They had assembled in the Bet HaMidrash. They prayed with all their hearts that God would save them, as the hour of reckoning had come. Early the following morning, the Pasha, accompanied by his soldiers, arrived at the Bet HaMidrash. They began banging on the door, crying, "Open the door for the Pasha." As the Shamash walked with faltering steps towards the door and was about to open it, he gazed with unbelieving eyes at a strange bag which lay in the basin in which the congregants washed their hands on entering the Bet HaMidrash. He could hardly lift the heavy bag, which he quickly handed to the head of the community. With unbelieving eyes, they saw its precious contents. The Shamash rushed back to open the door for the Pasha and his soldiers. "I have come for the 50,000 piastres which are due today," the Pasha demanded. "Here is your money," said the president of the community, handing over the bag to the Pasha. The Pasha looked at the bag of money and could hardly believe his eyes. "Why, this is indeed my bag of gold," he cried out in a shaky voice, his face turning pale. "How did it get to you?" But he did not wait for a reply. He knew the answer from his dream. Slowly, he began. "I will tell you how you got the money. Your holy fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, rose from their graves in the cave of Machpelah and brought it to you. I saw them in my dream. The guardian of Israel does not sleep, and I beg you now to forgive me for my evil intentions. Pray for me, and I promise I will never again attempt to do you harm in any way." So as this particular miracle took place on the 14th day of Tevet, when the Jews of Hebron were saved from a dreadful catastrophe, they took upon themselves to celebrate every 14th day of Tevet as their Purim, which came to be known as the window Purim, in remembrance of the window in the cave of Machpelah, which had brought them the miraculous salvation. The Tiberias Purim. In the early 17th century, the city of Tiberias, which borders on Lake Kinneret in Israel's north, was re-established by Sheikh Der El Amar, who invited Isaac Abulafia to bring Jews to join the settlement. Soon, the city had a sizable Jewish community. Governor Suleiman Pasha of Damascus was a local warlord. He laid siege to the city in 1743. For the duration of the siege, 83 days, the Jews of Tiberias stood in its defense. On the 27th of August, the Pasha raised the siege, but his plans to attack Tiberias were not over. While preparing his next attack, however, he suddenly died, and the Jews of Tiberias were saved from certain disaster. They declared both the day of the lifting of the siege, the 7th day of Elul, and the day of the Pasha's death, the 4th day of Kislev, local Purims. There are two Purims of Algiers, one in 1541 and one in 1774. On the 1st of November, Algerian Jews celebrate the anniversary of a great day in their history, the so-called Algiers Purim. In 1541, some 50 years after many of them escaped with their lives from the Spanish Inquisition, panic-stricken Algerian Jews filled their synagogues. They prayed to remain beyond the reach of the Holy Roman Emperor and ruler of Spain, Charles V. The emperor had sent his armada to Algiers to fight the Turks. A miracle occurred. A storm broke out, destroying more than 150 Spanish ships. The surviving sailors, frozen and starving, were routed. They took refuge with the remaining fleet at Bougie before returning to Spain. What Charles V did not know was that Algiers harbor was full of small rocks lurking just below the surface, God's trap. Pirates could navigate them, but a fleet of the size of the Spanish Armada could not. The French learnt the lessons of geography when they invaded Algeria in 1830, coming ashore at Sidi Ferruc instead of Algiers. So did the Americans when they liberated Algeria during World War II. The wooden teba in the Ibn Taoua synagogue in Old Algiers was apparently made from the prow of one of Charles V's wrecked ships. A second Purim, to mark an 18th century deliverance, is celebrated in the month of Tammuz in Algiers. Alejandro O'Reilly, despite his name and Irish origins, became a Spanish general. In 1774, O'Reilly was given command of a major Spanish expedition attacking Algiers. Mohammed ibn Uman, the Dey of Algiers, courageously defended the city against General O'Reilly. Many Jews living in Algiers had fled the Spanish Inquisition and dreaded a return to Spanish rule. Jewish legend has it that flames leapt out of the graves of two rabbis, Isaac ben Sheshet and Solomon ben Simon Duran. They contributed to the Spanish defeat. In order to celebrate the miracle of having again escaped from the Spaniards, the Jews of Algiers instituted a Purim on the 11th of Tammuz. The Jews of Libya marked two mini-Purims. The first was Purim Sherif. The city of Tripoli contained a large Jewish community. It was threatened with extermination when the governor of Tunis laid siege to the city in 1705. He devastated the surrounding area and threatened to kill all the inhabitants of the city. With just one last fortress to conquer, a sudden epidemic spread among his soldiers, and the governor was forced to withdraw his army. The Jews of Tripoli instituted that day, the 24th day of Tevet, as a Purim. The populace called it Purim Kidebuni, the false, to distinguish it from the Purim of Esther. The second event is the Burghul Purim. It took place in the last decade of the 18th century. At that time, a rebellion took place against Ali Pasha Karamanli, who had ruled Tripoli since 1754. His youngest son, Yusuf, murdered his eldest brother. A civil war broke out. Some Tripolitan notables appealed to the Sultan in Istanbul to re-establish direct rule over the city. The Sultan's response was to grant a firman to one Ali el-Jazarli, commonly known as Ali Burghul, a corsair adventurer. Burghul arrived in Tripoli in 1793 and assumed the position of Pasha. Burghul's installation in Tripoli initiated a reign of terror. He pressed taxation heavily on the population and particularly on the Jews. Notables suspected of loyalty to the previous regime, the Karamanlis, were executed, and several Jews were implicated in a plot against him. Among those to suffer was a son of Rabbi Avraham Khalfon. Khalfon had been head of the Jewish community for a while, and his son David, also a prominent figure in the community, was condemned by Burghul and burnt alive. A Jew named Rahamim Barda helped negotiate an agreement between the competing factions of the Karamanli family, who, with the aid of the Bey of Tunisia, were able to drive Burghul out in January 1795. The salvation of the city once again brought redemption to the Jews, and a special hymn, also in the form of a Mi Kamocha, was composed by Avraham Khalfon, retelling the events of Burghul's downfall and the Jews' deliverance. A second local Purim festival, known as Purim Burghul, was established to commemorate the day, the 29th of Tevet, and Khalfon's poem was incorporated into the liturgy. The Purim of Basra. Basra is the second largest city in Iraq after Baghdad. Its Jewish settlement dates back over 1,000 years. Nearly 200 years ago, a miraculous salvation came to the Jews of that city, which led to the establishment of a special Purim to commemorate the event. This miracle happened in the days of Suleiman Pasha, who governed Basra with justice and righteousness and treated the Jews kindly. Under the guidance of their leader, Rabbi Jacob ben Aaron, the Jewish community flourished. That is, until one day in Nisan, in the year 5534, equivalent to 1774, on that day, Karim Khan, the vizier of the Shah of Persia, arrived with a great army and besieged the city. Suleiman Pasha fought against Karim Khan, but could not prevail over him. A great famine spread in Basra, and the city could no longer be defended. On the 27th day of Nisan, the city fell into the hands of the invaders. The conquering soldiers robbed and pillaged the city, and many Jewish women threw themselves into the raging fires to escape the clutches of the barbarous hordes. On the first day of the month of Iyar, Karim Khan established his rule over Basra. He imposed heavy fines on the people, particularly on the Jewish community, taking their leaders as hostages. Rabbi Jacob ben Aaron, with his wife and children, were sent as prisoners to the Shah in Shiraz, along with Suleiman and his family. And while Karim Khan and his men sat down to drink, the city of Basra was in despair. Then the Jews of Basra gathered in their synagogue, proclaiming a fast of repentance and crying and weeping to God to save them from the hands of the wicked Karim Khan and his men. Karim Khan went out to fight against the neighboring Arab tribesmen, but his army suffered defeat and retreated to Basra with great losses. His battle-weary soldiers had no heart to fight anymore, and they plotted to kill Karim Khan. On the 27th day of Adar, 13 days after the original Purim, the wicked Persian vizier was found dead, poisoned by the hand of his own servants. News of the death of his vizier and of the defeat of his armies reached the Shah. He ordered the remnants of his army to leave Basra under the cover of darkness and return to Persia in secret. On the second day of Nisan, in the year 5535, that's 1775, the Jews of Basra rose up in the morning and discovered that not one of Karim Khan's men remained in the city. Great was the rejoicing of the Jews of Basra at this miraculous deliverance from the hands of so wicked an enemy. They gathered in their synagogue to offer thanks to God for the miracle and resolved to observe that day, year after year, as the day of the miracle. It so happened that a saintly rabbi and Kabbalist from the Holy Land was visiting Basra at that time. He had been sent as a special messenger by the Jewish community of Hebron to obtain financial support for the poor and needy of that ancient city. His name was Rabbi Jacob Eliashah. Rabbi Jacob Eliashah composed a special scroll for the Jews of Basra to be recited by them in the synagogue on this day of miracles. And ever since, they observed the second day of Nisan as a special Purim, the Purim of Basra. The Purim of the Bandits of Adrianople in Turkey, 1786. In European Turkey, near Adrianople, present-day Edirne, lies the city of Gumelcina. In 1786, the city was attacked by 5,000 mountain bandits, intent on pillaging the town. The Jewish community awaited the brigands in terror. The governor succeeded in driving off the brigands, but the Jews were accused of having conspired with them. The Jews energetically protested and proved their innocence. Afterwards, the Jews were accused of allowing the bandits to enter the city. With great difficulty, however, they managed to prove their innocence. In memory of their escaping both predicaments, a special Purim was instituted on the 22nd day of Cheshvan for the Jews of Gumelcina. The Purim of Rhodes, 1840. Although under Ottoman rule, the island of Rhodes was mostly populated by Greek Christians. They were in competition with the Jews in the sponge trade. In 1840, the Greeks took their revenge upon the Jews, causing the disappearance of a child. The child, however, was later found alive on the island of Syra. In the meanwhile, the Jews of Rhodes had been imprisoned and tortured. Sultan Abdul-Majid deposed the governor and gave the Jews a firman declaring that the accusation of ritual murder was false. By a curious coincidence, the imprisonment of the Jews and the granting of the firman took place on the day of the Purim of Esther. Since then, Purim has been celebrated as a double festival in Rhodes, and special prayers and hymns are read. The Purim de Sebastiano, also known as Purim de los Cristianos, and the Purim de las Bombas. The parchment you see on the screen is a parchment Megillah dating back to Tangiers in the 19th century. It fetched $8,000 at an auction in Jerusalem in 2017. Only a few such Megillot written in the form of a scroll and not in a pamphlet are known to exist. This scroll actually celebrates two mini-Purims. It is composed of two Megillot, which were read on the 2 days of Purim Katan, celebrated in Tangier, and also in Tétouan, Fez, and elsewhere in Morocco. Sebastian's Purim, also known as the Purim de los Cristianos, was instituted in the 16th century to celebrate the miracle of the deliverance of Moroccan Jews from a Portuguese invasion. In 1578, Sebastian, the king of Portugal, allied with the former king Muley Mohammed, attempted to conquer Moroccan cities from King Muley Abdel Malik, who had usurped the throne. The King of Portugal sent a mighty army of 17,000 soldiers in a fleet of 500 ships to Morocco. Using brilliant strategy, the Moroccan army lured the Portuguese army deep into the country. The latter marched for 5 days under the unrelenting, boiling Moroccan sun. Finally, the battle was fought near the town of El Ksar el-Kabir. Within 4 hours, the Portuguese army was defeated. 8,000 soldiers lay dead in the battlefield, and another 15,000 were taken into captivity. King Sebastian of Portugal, as well as King Abdelmalik of Morocco, were among the fallen. The third king, Muley Mohammed, drowned himself following the defeat. So all 3 kings died in 1 day. From that time, this battle was known as the Battle of the 3 Kings. The war directly impacted the fate of Moroccan Jews. It is said that 2 Anusim, or Jewish converts from the Portuguese army, told the Jews of Morocco that the King of Portugal had intended to convert the Jews to Christianity. In commemoration of this miracle of salvation, Moroccan Jews fixed a Purim Katan each year on the 2nd day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, with songs and praise and abstaining from work. Moroccan Jews call this festival Sebastian's Purim, or Purim de los Cristianos. The tidings of the death of King Sebastian of Portugal spread as far as Sfat. This Purim was celebrated until recent times. 3 centuries later, the Purim de las Bombas, or Purim of the Bombs, was instituted as a festival for posterity among Tangier Jews after the miracle of the salvation of the Jews of the city. In 1849, French ships bombed the city of Tangier from the sea. The Jewish neighborhood was not harmed in the least. In commemoration of that miracle, sages from Tangier instituted the celebration of a Purim Katan each year on the 21st of the month of Av. There have been mini-Purims as recently as the 20th century. Sorry, it's jump on first?
Do Djerba first.
Okay. In November 1942, the Nazis directly occupied Tunisia in order to block the Allied advance in North Africa. What happened to the Jews of Djerba during the 6 months of Nazi occupation during World War II? Isolated on their island in the farthest corner of eastern Tunisia, the Jews of that community appear to have been spared the roundups, resulting in males between the ages of 16 and 60 being sent to do forced labor. But one incident does stick in the collective memory. At the time of the reading of the parasha of Terumah, the Nazis sent out instructions that the Jews of Djerba should immediately give them 50 kilograms of gold. The deeply religious Jews of Djerba had just read the verse. God instructed Moses to tell all Israelites whose heart so moved them to bring gifts of gold. On that Shabbat, the residents knew that something was seriously amiss when the chief rabbi of the island drove around in his car collecting the gold. He did not manage to fill the quota of 50 kilos. But retribution did not come. The occupation was on its last legs. The Nazis never returned to the island of Djerba, and 2 months later, in May 1943, the Allies reconquered Tunisia. And so the Djerba Jews too mark their own mini-Purim. And this is the last mini-Purim I will tell you about. Megillat Hitler. Megillat Hitler is one of the more remarkable documents of the Holocaust. It's a scroll created in North Africa in 1943. And it's called Megillat Hitler. You can see it today at the US Holocaust Museum in Washington, DC. Written in the style of Megillat Esther and the Purim story, it celebrates the Allies' liberation of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, which saved the local Jewish communities from the Nazis. P. Hassin, a Hebrew teacher from Casablanca, peppered his Megillah with "Cursed be Hitler, cursed be Mussolini." The part of King Ahasuerus is represented by President Franklin Roosevelt. Hassin tells how Hitler's plan to deport the Jews of North Africa was foiled at the last minute by the decision of President Roosevelt, who could not sleep, and so commanded that these states be rescued and given protection. Thus, the Jews went from mourning into happiness because the Americans established their rule. The scroll declared that every year we are obligated to establish this day of rescue, a fixed and grand festival. But the Casablanca Jews rejoiced too soon. The Allies permitted nearly all the original senior officials of the Vichy regime in North Africa to remain in the new government. The Vichy Office of Jewish Affairs continued to operate. At the same time as Operation Torch, the Nazis retreated to Tunisia and imposed direct control. Thousands of Jewish men were marched to forced labor camps. American Jewish leaders were loath to publicly take issue with the Roosevelt administration, but by the spring of 1943, they began speaking out. The American Jewish Congress and the World Jewish Congress charged that the anti-Jewish legacy of the Nazis remains intact in North Africa and urged FDR to eliminate the Vichy laws. It would take the Allies another year after Hassin had written Megillat Hitler before the Jews of North Africa would have their rights restored to them. Next, we return to Persia, where the Purim story began. Ironically, once more, the Jewish people today are in danger and faced with genocidal threats, this time coming not from one man, but from the Iranian regime itself. Will we need another Purim miracle? Only time will tell.
One question, someone said, was Casablanca 1844 or 1944?
19.
The wrong year on the slide.
Oh, okay.
I apologise.
Okay, so thank you very much for listening to me, and Hag Purim Sameach.
And we want to see everyone's fancy dress now. Prize for the best one.
Should I mute everyone?
Yeah. Right. Take it off before it falls off.
It's a fun evening tonight. We're going to unmute everyone now, unusually early.
Oh dear. Yeah. Let me see.
Everyone can now unmute themselves, and the prize for the best fancy dress.
Amazing, thank you.
Hey, do we get the fancy dress?
I see Sean and Gerald in fancy dress there. Well done, you.
It was brilliant.
Amazing
Absolutely
stories
brilliant. I'm
all
just going to
over.
get something fancy. I'm just going to put something fancy dress on. Hold on.
Oh,
Give me a minute.
We can't wait.
wow.
Yeah, Sandy, you
Okay.
asked, is there a book about Purim? I think there are books, yeah. But actually, I found all the information on the internet.
Oh, okay. The place where everything is.
That's where everything is, exactly.
It's a brilliant research. It would make a wonderful book, Lynn.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to write it, I'm afraid. Sorry.
You read it. All you have to do is type it.
Yeah, you can have my notes.
Yeah, give me your notes. I'll make some poems.
What were you using for the noise?
It was a Purim rattle.
Oh, Brian.
It was moving from one story to the next.
I think it would make a great children's book. It would be wonderful.
Some of these stories I
with a-
took from bits of children's books. I think they were uploaded.
But it was brilliant, Lynn. It was really brilliant. Thank you very much.
You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Really good. Okay, here's my
Oh,
card.
nice
Very
to see you.
For the crown.
Oh,
That's
lovely.
really
Yeah.
on.
Another queen competition. Help.
Well, we're not competing.
Together.
Brilliant. I think you should have the prize. You should have the prize.
What's the prize? I'm going to give whoever had the best fancy dress.
Have you seen Lawrence? He looks pretty horrific.
Where's Lawrence?
Yeah.
Got a big mask on.
Mm.
Oh, right, there's Lawrence.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
yeah. Michelle, that looks good, huh?
hello. Very good.
Oh, very good, Lauren.
There you go.
Yeah, very good.
That's a terrific time many years ago.
I grew a mustache.
Oh,
Oh, I like that moustache.
Yeah, lovely.
Very good.
Ali,
cool.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Very clever.
I like Michelle's COVID outfit, actually.
Oh, it's to go on the other side.
Yeah. And one sack. Very nice evening. Well done. Brilliant.
It was very good.
I got the where's the prize then?
If you want to make mine COVID friendly,
Oh
here's
no.
one last tonight.
No, it was COVID.
The prize is going to Lynn.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Well deserved. Well
Very good.
deserved.
Excellent.
It was fantastic, Lyn.
Oh,
It was,
Definitely.
it was so lovely
Yeah,
to
well
hear you.
done.
Everything was just perfect.
oh,
Purim
thank
Sameach.
you. That's so nice. Thanks so
Purim
much.
Sameach,
After
everybody.
you, Lawrence, and all the
Yeah,
family.
Purim
You take
Sameach,
care.
everybody.
Thank you.
Take
Purim
care.
Sameach to everyone.
Merci
And love
beaucoup.
to all the babies.
Formidable.
Nice, nice. Wow, is that a combined half mask, Albert?
Just for the story, we used to get
Ah.
silver coins at Purim.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Shifted to Hanukkah now. Oh,
Hi,
like you.
Lyn, it's Marcel. Happy Purim. Hi, Lawrence.
Hi,
all the
Marcel.
best.
Lovely to hear from
It
you.
was really lovely. Very nice afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Samir, bye.
Bye.
Lyn,
Bye.
Yeah.
Toby, it was a great presentation. So
Oh, thank you.
interesting, really terrific.
Really fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We learned
Abigail, do you
a lot, a
remember
lot.
celebrating any of these Purims? Do you remember
Oui.
celebrating any?
Yeah,
of
with the
these?
kids. Yes. Always
with
we used to dress them up and
No,
go
no,
to the cinema.
yeah, the Purim of Esther, yes, but these mini-Purims, I think nobody celebrates them anymore.
No, no.
Yeah.
But there are brilliant stories, really good. I like the one from Basra.
Yeah, the one from Basra. I think the Jews are always a bit worried about paying their taxes, though.
Yeah.
That's the main problem. Yeah, and of course, fending off the Christians because they didn't want to, you know, that was even worse, I think, if the Christians took over.
Yeah. They're still fighting. They're still fighting now
Yeah.
against the Iranians.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, Yvonne. Yeah, I'll send you my notes.
Thank you.
Don't know what you want to do with them really, but yeah. Not very poetic.
No, well, they are good. You can, well, when we can have a dinner party next, we can talk about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. Dinner party
Yes.
constipation. Or you can write a PhD thesis about this.
Yes.
Storytelling style. We're using your notes, but it was like reading a story, a storybook.
Oh, wow. I like that, Jacqueline. You're really entering into the spirit. Lovely. Thank you, Dovelet. Thank you. They all had a happy ending, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that they all obviously were preceded by great threats, but that's the history of the Jews.
Yeah, indeed, indeed.
Okay, thank you again.
Where are you that you're wearing
Thank
a
you.
mask?
Thank you,
Thank
Yvonne.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, bye.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
De rien.
Merci beaucoup. C'était formidable. J'ai beaucoup appris.
Ah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much.
Merci
you.
beaucoup à vous.
The real Purim spiel.
Where did I get what? Where did I get what? The crown
Lawrence
on
got it-
Amazon.
Lawrence got it from Amazon.
It keeps falling off though. You can have it, Lizette.
We think our granddaughter will like it next time we see
I
her.
was very impressed you could keep it on the whole time you were reading, and
Actually, it was a near, nearly fell off.
another Purim miracle.
Another Purim miracle, exactly.
Taking your groggers at the same time.
Yeah, thanks. Oh dear.
Okay.
Anyway, lovely
Purim
to
Sameach.
have you all, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you
Happy
too.
Purim Sameach.
Ag Purim.
Okay. I'll see you tomorrow, Lizette. Huh? On Zoom. Tomorrow on Zoom. Yeah.
Where?
On
Où est-ce qu'il y
Zoom.
a encore un Zoom demain?
Non, 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 c'est pas pour vous, c'est
Ah.
une réunion. Non, c'est
Ok.
pas- Mais la semaine prochaine, next week, we have Norman Stillman, who